Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Coralie Mills, a world renowned dendrochronologist and one of the leading authorities on historic wooden landscapes. As director of Dendrochronicle, Coralie has dedicated her career to uncovering the deep connections between people, forests, and timber throughout history. Through her pioneering work in dendrochronology, environmental archaeology, and landscape history, she has transformed our understanding of how woodlands were managed, used, and valued in the past. Coralie is also co-author of the new research framework for dendrochronology in Scotland, an important step towards advancing the use and understanding of tree ring science across the country. So, Coralie, it's an absolute pleasure. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Vincent. It's taken us a little while to get our heads together at the same place at the same time.
I know.
Absolutely thrilled to have the chance to chat with you today.
This really, really good. So I'll start with my first question to my guest is I'm just really fascinated by the background, and if you were interested from the start, if it took a while for you to get into this subject and get a passion for it, but just take me through how you started.
Okay, well, yeah, my love of landscape came from my mum, who was from a Dorset family whose ancestors would have worked the land, basically. My mum knew all the names of plants, the folk names, not the Latin names.
Oh, lovely.
Whenever we went on walks, which was our main sort of hobby because it was a free thing to do, she would tell me about the names of the plants we were looking at in the hedgerows and on the verges and in the fields. And so that manifested itself as an interest in botany, landscape history. And eventually I went to Reading University and did a first degree called Environmental Plant Geography. I was incredibly lucky.
Wow.
It was a very sort of niche degree, and it was run between two departments, the Department of Botany and the Department of Geography at Reading University. And there were only 2 students on the course. Can you imagine that? That just would not happen now. It just would not happen. A lot of our lectures were joint with either botanists or geographers, but we got lots of individual tuition in tutorials and so on. So that was really a launch pad for me because I was really interested in landscape history, and that was a really good basis. I had a lot of ecological content, soil science, geology, geography, human geography as well, and botany, ecology, plant communities, all these things. And I didn't do that straight from school. I actually worked in a lab for a couple of years when I left school because I come from a working class family. And nobody in my family had ever gone to university before. So it took me a while to get to sort of realise that I could do it. And so I worked for 2 years, then went to Reading University. Then I worked for another couple of years in London. So I've done the living in London thing, and I enjoyed it at the time, but I would never go back to it. I was a young woman then. London would exhaust me now, but it was good to have the opportunity to live there. But I was doing a fairly dead-end job there and thought there must be more to life. So I applied to do a master's in environmental archaeology, which was really sort of a logical next step for my interest in landscape history and so on. So I did that at Sheffield University in the Department of Archaeology. That we are now talking the 1980s. When I did that. And while I was there, I was offered the chance to do a PhD after my master's. So I did a PhD in the dendrochronology of Exeter Cathedral and other medieval buildings in Exeter. And so I didn't get into dendrochronology because I set out to get into dendrochronology. It was quite by accident, but it suited me. It suits my temperament, because it's exciting, and when you get a result, it can be fairly instant. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into getting to the point where you get a result, but when you get a result, it's like an instant wham, you get a precise date for something. That's a thrill. That still thrills me now, even though I've been working in this field for a very long time. So something about the immediacy of the process appeals to me. The fact that it's part practical, part intellectual. I'm so lucky, I think, to do a job that I really love, because I know lots of people that end up in jobs that they don't really love. And you're probably the same yourself, Vincent.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love my work. I'm incredibly lucky. That was an awful lot of studying.
Yes, it was a lot.
That was quite full on. Then to do a PhD after that, I mean, that was just. Did you ever get to a stage where you thought, I just need a break here? I can't do any more studying.
I did actually take a 3 months break between the masters and the PhD, just to let my head settle a bit, because the masters, I absolutely loved that masters, but it's the hardest I've ever worked. It was harder than doing the PhD, actually. It was a very full-on masters. Yeah, we had 25 hours of teaching every week. We had about 2 to 3 essays a week. It was really full on, but I loved every single minute of it. And we had the most excellent lecturers at Sheffield University. This is the archaeology department that the high ups have decided to close. There is no archaeology department at Sheffield, but it was world leading in so many things. It's a great, great shame that it closed down, But you'll still find lots of archaeologists out there who were trained at Sheffield, and they would, I'm sure, to a man and a woman, all say how brilliant that department was.
Did you have a clue as what your sort of career looked like, and also were you thinking about the financial stability of what you were going into? Because it was incredibly a really niche subject, isn't it?
Really niche. No, I didn't think about those things. The thing that was most important to me was for it to be interesting. I never thought about, I need to do this because then I can earn a certain amount of money and I'll have stability and all the rest of it. None of that. It was all accidental. And it was the most important thing to me, is that it's interesting, and still the case now. Yeah. So no, it wasn't a financially based plan at all. And in fact, if you want to be rich, I would suggest you don't enter on.
Exactly. So just for some of our viewers who aren't familiar with dendrochronology, could you just explain what it is?
Well, we think about the word dendrochronology. The dendro is, but it's from the Greek, basically. So dendro is a tree, chronology is time, and we're using trees, more specifically tree rings, to study time. So it's the science of tree rings, really, dendrochronology. And in my case, I'm applying it in the heritage sphere, either in buildings, archaeological sites, or old landscapes with old trees in them.
Right, and it's matching tree rings to certain data that we have, to then try to get a match of the year that tree was grown.
Absolutely. So in the heritage field, we're largely using ring width as our characteristic that we're measuring. So we're measuring the ring widths of the rings in a sample and trying to match up that pattern, that unique pattern, with reference data where we already know the date and the provenance of the material. So when you do tree ring dating, you get 2 for the price of 1, really, because you get a date, or nearly always get a date. It doesn't always work, of course, but most of the time, if we're good at selecting the right samples, it will work. You get a precise date, but you also get a provenance for the timber, i.e. where the trees grew. So that can be very powerful in terms of studying, for example, the patterns of the patterns of trading over time and how they change. For Scotland, we have loads of imported timber from the late medieval period onwards. And so being able to date and provenance the timber is essential. And luckily, dendrochronology does the 2 in 1, basically.
Is there any other type of dating that you can use apart from dendro?
Well, yes, although there is none so precise. I mean, we can get a date to a year and sometimes a season for the felling of a tree. So radiocarbon dating doesn't come close. Even these sort of refined wiggle matching type dates will still give you a date range. And once you get into the sort of late medieval period and later, which is where most of our buildings sit time-wise, radiocarbon will not give you anywhere near a precise enough answer. So, generally speaking, we wouldn't advise people to do radiocarbon dating on anything that's sort of 1500s and onwards, because the answer would be very imprecise and might even cover more than one century.
Yeah, and you're alongside dendrochronology, you're also studying historic wooded landscapes as well. That must make you even more specialist, because, or is that part and parcel of a dendrochronologist's journey to study historic woods? And
no, I think I'm quite unusual in doing that, actually, and it's because I had that background in landscape history and botany, and I've been very lucky. I've been working since I went freelance, which was 2009. I've been working with a forester called Peter Quelch, and Peter is an expert on the historic management of native woodlands, especially, and historic forestry practices. So I've learned an awful lot by working with Peter, and we've very often looked at woods together, and he'll see things that I don't see. I'll see things perhaps that he doesn't see, and we have very complementary skill sets. So that has given me the opportunity to learn about historic woodland management, and to develop an approach which is quite holistic and looks at lots of strands of evidence to reveal the story of a particular wooded landscape. Each one will be unique. We use the tree rings in those historic landscapes to get the ages of trees and some of the management history of the trees as well. So, for example, if trees have been pollarded, we would see the signal for trees being cut back on a cycle within the ring pattern. So, you can look at the tree forms alongside the tree rings, and you start to get a lot of information about how a wood has evolved and what people have been doing to old woods.
And is there anything over the last 10 years, is there anything that you've discovered that is quite groundbreaking and that we just didn't know before this time, from your work? There's probably a few things, isn't there?
Well, yeah, there probably are quite a few things, really. I think that the approach we've developed has been the first time, certainly in Scotland and perhaps more widely, where we're using tree ring dating to reveal woodland history. And so every site that we've done has revealed unexpected and new information about the history of a site. If you don't use tree rings, then getting the ages of trees is just guesstimating, really. I mean, people use girth of a tree to estimate its age, but I can guarantee that in Scotland, that is hugely misleading. I've got a really good example when I'm lecturing. I show 2 ash trees, one of which is 4 meters circumference. The other one is 1 meter circumference. They grew a couple of 100 meters apart from each other at Loch Catrin. They're both the same age as each other. They're both late 7th century, because the big tree had been pollarded, had been managed, and was in a slightly sunnier location than the smaller tree, which was on a north-facing slope and was just a maiden that had not been managed at all. So they were both late 17th century in origin. So, the big tree took 4 people could hold hands around it. The the other tree just is a one-person hug, basically. So, there's a big difference in how they look and what size they are, but no difference in their age. And we just would not know that without doing the tree ring work.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And this was even more so than it is today, was critical for us to understand trees, woodlands, how to harvest them, everything. I mean, because it was just absolutely our main, pretty much one of our main resources, wasn't it, for building and basically so many things involved wood, and it would have been incredibly important. And have we sort of learnt how, because it is such a lost art, so have we learnt things obviously that we didn't know, how the woodland was managed, and the craftsmen, that they just knew so much, didn't they? They knew just so much, and that must be forgotten now. A lot of that must be just lost in history,
Yeah, I think well, in Scotland, the history of woods is rather checkered. We lost a lot of our native woodland cover fairly early on, and our work on buildings and dating and provenancing timber in buildings up here shows that by the 15th century, most of our timber is being imported in Scotland. And so we don't have a strong tradition of looking after woodlands in the medieval period at all. It's the material we see in buildings from the medieval period, if it is native material, looks like something that's come out of a hunting forest or a wilder sort of a landscape, because you get these very long-lived trees, quite often with sequences of 300, 400 rings, up until about 1400. We see a lot of material like that. Well, that's not managed oak. It's not forestry managed oak. It's something different. And then we ran out. And basically after that, Scotland is looking to predominantly to Scandinavia for its timber source, Norway especially. And we do have some Baltic material and other sources in amongst it. But basically the forests were not being well managed. And I think that the reason for that is the dislocation between the ownership of trees and the people who are working the land. So farming and forestry have always been very separate in Scotland, well, the last 1,000 years anyway. It's the landowners who own the woodlands and the valuable timber resources. The farmers were not involved in forestry, and any oak or ash on their land would belong to the landlord, not to the farmer. So we don't we have this very separated history of the people who look after the land are farming, but they're not looking after the trees or the timber. And the landlords, on the whole, had other interests. Things changed a bit from, I don't know, let's say about 1700s. The landlords start getting interested in creating plantations and making cash out of timber for construction and for other things. But I mean, an awful lot of our oak woodlands here are industrial coppice plantations of around about 1800, when the iron furnaces needed a lot of charcoal. So, and the tan bark industry needed a lot of oak bark. That there's probably far more of that around than a material that was being used for timber. And we're absolutely dominated by imported timber here.
So did you say it was a case of just running out of material initially?
Yeah, I think so. By the late medieval period, there was not a lot of decent oak left. Certainly in the central belt, eastern Scotland, we see imports everywhere. We have got some gaps in our data. We don't know We haven't done many projects in the West Highlands, for example, and not done many projects in Southwest Scotland. They might have a different story. I think we've got documentary evidence that in Dumfries and Galloway, oak woodland survived for a bit longer, like into the 1700s. But, you know, an awful lot of what people see as an old oak woodland are actually industrial coppice plantations of circa 1800.
And how much of it was going to England at that time? Was that another reason? Was it sort of harvested a lot and then taken down to, you know, for the English to build ships and things? No,
not really. There's barely any trade in timber between England and Scotland. There's barely a stick of English timber in Scotland. Scotland ran out of timber before England did. England has a longer history of native timber use, basically, than Scotland does. So Scotland did not import from England. We just don't find English material. But Scotland imported from Scandinavia and the Eastern Baltic. And it's to do with the separate histories of the two countries to a large degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what species are we finding in Scotland that were used for building materials?
Yeah, so we do find a lot of oak, and we find use of Scots pine, native Scots pine, particularly in vernacular buildings in the Highlands. So they were using local material, and that contradicts everything I've just said. But, you know, in certain parts of the country, local native pine was being used near the Caledonian pine woods. We found evidence of that in cruck frame cottages and small building, but that's peculiar to the Highlands, really. It's local use of local material. And those trees still belong to the landlord. They didn't belong to the people. The tenants would have to get permission to get that material or buy it. You know, they weren't, the ordinary end of the population would not have had free access to timber resources. They would be having to buy this material, or it might be a condition of their tenancy that they can have access to certain timber resources.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the minority, really, the pine stuff.
Okay, so we had Scots pine, oak. Was there any larch? You said ash as well.
Yeah, ash. I've certainly seen ash in buildings. Some of the crook frames are built with ash. For example, in Perthshire, there's a couple of crook frame houses with ash in them, and some elm, even sycamore. These are buildings built around about 1800. Not seen larch in a building at all. The only other conifer that I have seen is Norway spruce, imported alongside pine from Norway. So larch, I know, was used in boat building here, though. But I haven't looked at any larch timbers from anything. It'd be fun to do that. It ought to work, you know. Ought to be possible to date if it does ever turn up. Yeah. We always do species identification first on our assemblages. Oak, you can identify by eye, you know that that's oak, but everything else needs a species identification just to make sure we're working with same species samples and using the right sets of reference data for the same species of tree, because trees, different species of trees respond differently to climate and weather and growing conditions.
And how would an oak, so Quercus robur, in the north of Scotland differ to the same tree in the south of England? How would that differ? Would it be hardier because of the conditions?
It would grow incredibly slowly. I've got some oak samples from pretty far north in Scotland, and they're so slow grown, tiny little rings, whereas your oak in England is generally growing quite quickly. It will have quite wide rings and would be harvested younger, I think, you know, that you'd be looking in managed forestry systems, you'd be looking at oak that was around about 80 100 years old when it's harvested for timber. We just don't get that sort of material being grown in Scotland for timber production. And in the far north, the oak grows so slowly that you'd need a very old tree to get a decent size of timber.
Yeah.
And much more of that northern oak stuff is all for the tan, bark, and charcoal industries.
Oh, I see. Yeah, and would that be if the tree rings are that much closer and it's denser? Would it possibly be? It's going to be almost like a different wood, really, isn't it? Because it might be too dense to use as a wood.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, isn't it? That it just might be too hard. It might not be suitable for joinery if it's that dense.
Yeah. Having said all that, I'm going to contradict myself now, because some of the best timber, native timber I've seen, is material that I worked on in St Giles Cathedral. That's in Edinburgh's old town, St Giles. If you've probably seen it. It's got a big bell tower in the centre with a stone crown-shaped decoration on the top of it. It's like a crown-shaped spire. Within that tall tower, there's a 5-story timber frame, which I took samples from as part of a research project on oak in southeast Scotland. And that turned out to be very nicely grown material. Was quite old, though, when harvested. And it came from northeast Scotland. Probably it came from the Royal Forest of Darnaway, because we know that forest was used for a lot of crown projects. And we know that St Giles benefited from the patronage of James II and his Queen Mary of Guelders. And at the time, at the dates I got for the tower, which was in the late 1450s to 1460, James II was on the throne until he prematurely died after getting blown up by one of his own cannon. And then Mary of Guelders was regent for 3 years, and it's probably under them that this material was brought from the Royal Forest of Darnaway all the way from northeast Scotland down probably through the Port of Leith to St Giles. That is the only building in Edinburgh with native timber in it that we found, and there's been quite a lot of dendro work in
That's incredible. You'd never believe that, would you?
It's built. It's
didn't realise.
We have mainly Norwegian and some Swedish or Danish structural timber in Edinburgh and much of south and eastern Scotland. And their forests are over here, sitting in our roof spaces. In fact, Sorry.
Yeah, no, you go. Carry on.
Norway banned the export of oak in 1602 because they realised they were running out. And then we see a big switch to the import of pine from Norway and Sweden, Denmark area.
I was going to ask that question. So up until 1600s, a lot of oak was coming over. Is that Quercus robur as well? European oak, Quercus robur.
Well, we can't tell the difference between robur and Patria on anatomical grounds, so we just say Quercus spur.
Oh,
yeah,
I see.
Quercus species. We can't tell which it is. In the native oak of Scotland would largely be Patria. We see a lot of robur planted in Scotland, and we see a lot of hybrids in Scottish oak woods as well. And I've seen some very old hybrids, for example, the Dalkeith old oaks, the oldest ones of which I've dated to the 1500s. Even some of those really old trees are hybrids of robur and Patria, which I think.
How do they differ? Out of interest, how does robur and Patria differ as a building material, if it does at all?
I suspect it doesn't differ that much, really. Sessile oak has the reputation of being able to grow very tall and straight, and was preferentially planted in some woodlands around about 1800, that era. I've worked on one particular woodland where we have these gorgeous, tall, straight, 200-year-old sessile oaks. So that, there may have been some selection going on about what was planted, but we see plenty of robur planted up here in Scotland as well. And there are documented examples of people bringing seed from England to Scotland. There's also a lot of import of acorns from the Netherlands. That sort of their horticultural history goes back a long time. So, all the old oak trees we see in Scotland don't necessarily hail from Scottish stock.
No, it's funny, isn't it? And it's so in Norway, because you always imagine Scandinavia that they build everything out of pines, firs and pines, wouldn't you? But they were obviously using oaks because they got fed up of importing it to Scotland in 1600 and then started swapping it out for the pines and the firs.
Yes, absolutely.
I see.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it makes the life of a dendrochronologist in Scotland quite interesting, because we have a very, very different and unique timber history, so different to England. And as I say, no exchange of material between England and Scotland. So it's like they are two entirely different entities.
So you must have discovered so much over the last 10 years of study and research. You must have, because this wouldn't have been, a lot of the stuff that you've learned over the last 10, 15 years just wouldn't have been known back then.
Well, yeah, I've got to big up my colleague Anne Crone here, because myself and Anne have been the only two heritage dendrochronologists in Scotland. And actually, funnily enough, we both did our PhDs at Sheffield at the same time. Anne did hers on oak from Crannogs and alder from Crannogs, a Crannog being an artificial island that people lived on. And I was working on Exeter Cathedral and other buildings while Anne was doing her stuff. And we've been friends since then, and both been working quite often together collaboratively on developing the tree ring record for Scotland. And there's never a dull moment in the tree ring record for Scotland. No. It's fascinatingly complicated. And so different to England. Yeah.
And what's the sort of current level of support for Scottish buildings at the moment with the regarding dendrochronology?
It's pretty appalling, I have to say, Vincent. That is also very different to England. Historic England have invested in dendrochronology of buildings for a very long time, and have had even an in-house dendrochronologist since the days I was at university. Because when I was at Sheffield, I got trained in the English Heritage Lab. It was in Sheffield, it's based in Sheffield University. So I was trained by Jennifer Hillam and Kathy Tyers, who's still working for English Heritage as a dendrochronologist. But the lab got moved out of the university quite a long time ago. And now they contract out most of their work. So in England, there are several tree ring labs who are largely kept going by work that's paid for by Historic England. The same does not happen in Scotland. We have, I don't know, there just is very little support from central institutions for tree ring work, even though there's so much that can be learned from it. I think there's all sorts of reasons for this, I reckon. One is that Scottish buildings don't wear their timbers on the outside, and people don't seem to see the timber as an important aspect of a building, because generally speaking, you're talking about hidden roof structures and hidden frame structures. Whereas, the great sort of framing tradition in England, much of England, you can see that the buildings that are timber built are listed.
I didn't know that. Didn't realise that. And so what are they covered with? Is it like a shiplap type of covering, or in Scotland? I didn't realise that it wasn't exposed.
Depends on which end of the scale you're looking at. But stonework in castles, our surviving castles are nearly all stone buildings with hidden roof structures and hidden floor structures. if we go down the social scale a bit and start thinking about vernacular buildings, then there would have been a lot of cruck frame buildings, but the highland clearances and the loss of the people and the changes in the management of the land as we lost the people means that fairly few vernacular buildings survive. So many were destroyed or became ruinous. So when they do survive, we ought to be throwing everything at them and doing dendrochronology. But honestly, Vincent, there's very little take up in Scotland of heritage dendrochronology for all sorts of reasons. I think another one, I'm going to ask your opinion about but the architects are trained in building materials, and they seem to get lots of training about stonework, but no training about timber. And their awareness of timber structures is fairly limited. I would also wonder if, well, you touched on it earlier on when we were first talking, that repair and retention of timber is not the norm here. Much more often, the historic timbers in a old building will be taken out and replaced. We've often rescued assemblages from skips, and oh yeah, I'm not going to say which building it is, but a 17th century building in Stirling. We had to rescue the roof timbers out of a skip and make a big fuss about them having been discarded. Original 17th century fabric. As not the only example.
Okay.
This is still happening on a fairly routinely, that old timbers are removed without record and the dendro work is not done.
So is there not a beginning of a project, a conservation officer coming in and saying those are 17th century, must be kept, must be restored? Because that's what happens, in England.
I think we have a job to do. We need to persuade our building conservation officers to take our timber heritage seriously. I'd say that I've been trying to promote dendro. Me and Anne have both been trying to promote dendro to architects and historic building conservation officers and so on, but with limited success, I would say. There are now certain council areas where the council archaeologist has a say on buildings, and archaeologists tend to value the fabric of the building rather more. So we've got a couple of counties, let's call them districts, in Scotland, where we are getting conditions put on buildings that the dendro needs to be done, but it's only 2 authorities, and the rest of the country it doesn't happen.
Right. Okay. But even before dendro, for me, it's sort of common sense to, somebody who is in the industry, who understands historic buildings, to walk into a building and understand that joist they're looking at, or a beam, is old. So if you understand that it's old, then the next question is, how old is it? Is it 50 years? Is it 100 years? Is it 300 years? So the fact that it actually looks old should then surely there should be other questions asked. Right? How old is it? Get somebody in like myself. I can look at it and I can give you a pretty good indication of what I think it would be stylistically, and then somebody like yourself or Anne would then come in and then confirm that. So I'm struggling to understand why that very simple piece of that process is not being done. Is it because there are people that aren't qualified, not employed? What's the reason?
I think it must be an awareness thing amongst the building conservation officers that the timber heritage, as I said, is rather more hidden than in English buildings that wear timber frames on the outside. But I think let's ask your listeners to suggest to us what we could do to get this message across to the right people, because Anne and I have been trying very hard for the last few years with very little change, really, I'm afraid.
I'm so surprised. I am really, really surprised that you think it would just have the same system, same process, same formula as it does in England, but it doesn't seem to have.
No, it doesn't. I'll give you a few numbers here, right? The number of dendro-dated buildings in England is around about 4,500 and upwards, heading towards 5,000. The number of dendro-dated historic buildings in Scotland is around about 50.
No way.
Well, if you count every individual building at Stirling Castle where there has been investment, then, and a few other sites like that where there's more than one building, then there's about 75 buildings at 50 sites in Scotland that have had dendrochronology. And most of the ones that have had dendrochronology done are parts of research projects that we've made happen, or they are Historic Environment Scotland's own properties, but then only some of their properties. Stirling Castle's had loads of work done. It's 7 different buildings there have been dendro-dated. Edinburgh Castle's Great Hall has been dendro-dated and so on. So we do get some work from Hess, but it's very slow progress. And
that's incredible. And it's all, and also just talking to you over the last 35 minutes, it's such an engaging subject and topic because it's so fascinating. It's not the norm, just from what you've said just previously. So therefore,
it's magical.
It is exactly. So therefore, that must be, must encourage. For me, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we've got to find out about this. We've got to do something.
Well, this is an opportunity. I'm so keen to speak to you, Vincent, because I see your podcast as an opportunity to just get that message out there a bit wider and maybe get a few more people thinking about the issues that we're facing here.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really valid point, actually, because I'm really surprised. Really, really surprised. Didn't know this.
Do you work? May I ask, have you worked on the palaces in Scotland, Holyrood?
No, I've never ever worked in Scotland.
No. Okay. Well, yeah, that's interesting. Well, you're working in the English sphere where you'll know there are a number of dendrochronologists. You'll know now that there are thousands of buildings that have been dated, largely because English Heritage wanted them to be dated. They use, in England, dendrochronology is used to inform the listing process, but that does not happen in Scotland.
That's bizarre, and the fact I'm still getting over the shock of those 17th century timbers being rescued from a skip.
I've got some nice 15th century material that came out of a building in St Andrews University as well, that we rescued from the back lawn.
Don't tell me that.
Yes,
oh,
I'm afraid
my
so. And it's some of the best material I've ever worked on. It's beautiful native pine with 300 rings in a sample. It was.
Oh my goodness!
And it's only thanks to an archaeologist who worked in that building at St Andrews University, who blew the whistle and said, "You've got to come and look at this stuff." And Anne and I just went up there and took as many samples as we could. I don't think we had any funding for it. We just did it. But it does not serve Scotland's heritage world well. It reflects poorly on our heritage world, and I think we have to keep on plugging away and try and get change. The other issue that I'd like to ask you about is about how structural engineers regard old timber, because I think they're very cautious, and we know that if we're working in a building with oak, the sapwood will have woodworm through it. but the heartwood will be sound as anything. But from the outside, it will look like, it's a bit wormy and a bit falling apart. And I think structural engineers veer so much on the side of caution that they'll say, yeah, you're going to have to take that out and replace it.
It's something that I come across this all the time, and it really, really frustrates me, because what a lot of these, so-called specialists don't understand is that insect infestation is probably about 200 years old or something.
Yes.
It was done so many years ago when the building had a higher moisture content and the environment was wetter. Then you see a lot of this historic insect infestation. However, it's stood up for the last 200 or 300 years without any problem. And then they look at these pieces and go, "Oh my god, no, that's going to fall apart." And as you and I know, and a lot of the sap wood, it was very, very hard to come by. You can't just use all the heartwood. You had to use part of the sap as well to have your section of timber, and that's always going to be exposed, and that looks absolutely dreadful. It looks like it's going to fall apart to the untrained eye. So I'm constantly, the amount of times people want to shore up a building with steel because they're worried about the woodwork. It might be crooked. It might be leaning slightly. And I always say to them, look, that probably did it in the first 20, 30 years of that building's life.
Exactly. And these buildings have stood up for so long, they'll still be standing after all the not so brilliant buildings that we're making at the moment have long gone, And they were built, the little vernacular buildings, they were built by the person that was going to live in them. Hand-built buildings that were really robust. And, I don't know, how do we change hearts and minds on this one? Because it's very difficult.
I think it's, I think a lot of the structural engineers, it's what they're liable for, isn't it? It's the risk. So if something does happen, they are, they're in their professional capacity, they are there to advise. So they just want to put belt and braces on, don't they? Say, well, I don't know, this may have stood for 200 years, but it might come down tomorrow. So I'm going to protect myself and put a massive great big steel by the side of it. So I think until that changes, until the responsibility I think what needs to happen is, this is why I love speaking to Ed Morton, because he's dead against all these steels going in buildings and things, and we need to have more people like Ed. And I'm not a structural engineer, but I've got a good knowledge of wood and buildings, and people like myself standing up and speaking, and presenting and saying, look, okay, we are we're ripping too much good material out of buildings. We're putting too many steels in listed buildings and period buildings. And I think that's the only way that we can, it's just changing minds. And then once you have that, then you'll have a situation where a structural engineer will have to maybe put the responsibility back onto the client. I don't know what can happen, because somebody's got to take responsibility. But it's a shame. It's just this, it could be risky. Okay, that's it. And also, Coralie, the other thing is I find is that I work with a lot of people that are incredibly passionate about historic buildings, but others that aren't so passionate. They don't care as much. They're not, if the conversation came up about removing that particular beam, I'd be jumping up and down, waiting to have my point of view, my opinion heard. And then others seem to be just quite calm that could possibly be replaced. That beam could be replaced, and they seem quite calm about it. But I think you and I and Ed and Anne, all these people, I think we're just very unique. We're just so passionate about what we do. We absolutely love what we do. There just aren't enough of us And
there's not many of us, and that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if there's not the work, you can't, Anne and I have had to do lots of things other than dendrochronology to stay, to be able to pay our bills. We're not doing dendro on buildings all the time. We're just doing maybe one a year or something like that, each. We're having to do lots of other stuff to keep afloat. So our opportunities to get in front of a structural engineer or whoever are limited. I think we probably need to look at where those people are trained and look at what's in, what do architects learn about timbers when they're training to be an architect? What do structural engineers learn about timber when they're training to be a structural engineer? Somehow we're going to have to get into the food chain, if you see what I mean, into their careers earlier and make our case.
There's also got to be some something scientific that you could gauge the integral strength of a piece of wood by just finding the time to measure basically what, even a slight a core or something from that piece of wood. If it could be saved, then that core could be taken out, and then you could then say, okay, based on this, the tensile strength of this piece of wood is such and such, so it's going to more than be capable of holding up the floor above it. It's that type of, that's what we've got to really get into, rather than just looking at it, making an opinion, and taking something down that is 4 times stronger than you actually think it is.
There's another issue here which I've become aware of in the loss of historic timber from old buildings when they're being restored or changed, modified. There's actually a resale market. There's a big salvage operation in Glasgow, big salvage yard that takes old timbers from these sites. Somebody gets a few quid for them, and the material is going into a recycled chain, but of course it's lost all its context. If we went into that timber yard to look at that material, we wouldn't know where it had come from or anything. The material is far more informative in its context, and that's another argument for retention, is that those timbers are sitting there just waiting to tell a story about the building. And we're losing that opportunity to tell those stories.
This needs a little bit more thought, I think, and see what we can do. And it would be good to. I'd love to come up to Scotland and present. I'd love to come up and do something. I think it's just maybe there's not enough of that around. That there's just not enough knowledge, education, or people aren't listening. I don't know, one of the two. So, but no, well, that's a conversation for another time. But let's move on to the new research framework for dendrochronology in Scotland. And let's hear about that, Coralie. Oh, wonderful!
The printed version of this, but I'll send you a link after we've spoken, Vincent, because there is a PDF of this available very readily on the SCARF website, the Scottish Archaeological Research Framework's website. So anybody can get a hold of a copy of this, right? And there's a whole chapter on dendrochronology in historic buildings in Scotland, and it makes the case for what we've been talking about already. It's making the case for the much wider use of dendro in buildings. So this is great. Now, this is a team effort between a few of us that work in Scotland. So it's Anne Crone and me, who are the heritage dendrochronologists, but it's also got chapters on the use of tree rings in ecology, and it's got chapters on the use of tree rings in climatology, and then it's got chapters on historic buildings, archaeology, and old wooded landscapes. And it's a very easy read. It's been written for a general audience. It's not full of language people won't understand.
Yeah.
Well worth a little look.
It looks fantastic.
Yeah, that gives us.
I love.
It's the start.
Yeah, I love the front cover. Who designed that?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to look up their name, but I just want to give a flipping big shout out to Matt Ritchie, who is the archaeologist in Forestry and Land Scotland, which is the name now for the organisation that used to be the Forestry Commission in Scotland. And he paid for the production of these books, and he paid the illustrator who made that beautiful design. Have to have a little look to find the name. Can't find it very easily. I'm going to tell you later, okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it's good. And how long has that taken, that project, from start to finish?
I'd say a lifetime, in a sense that it's distilling a lifetime's worth of knowledge for both Anne and me. But I think it was about a year's turnaround from us first getting our team together and then producing the research framework.
Oh, that's quicker than I thought.
Yeah, it was good. We had, everyone, we sort of turned it into bite-sized pieces of work for each of the 5 authors. So we weren't all writing all the chapters. And it was a joy to work with the others on the team. It all came together very nicely. And big shout out to the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, which is the place where the SCARF team work, the Scottish Archaeological Research Framework team, are based at the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland. And they facilitated this very capably and made it easy for us to produce the framework, really.
Amazing. And what are the key points that you want to get across to the reader?
Well, I think we covered there the key points about, the key points about the value of dendrochronology in historic buildings, what it can tell you. The same for archaeology. The woodland side of it. If anything, I do more work on woodlands now than I do on buildings, because the conservation movement and the rewilding movement and the reforesting movement have realised that it's helpful to them to understand the dynamics of old pieces of woodland that they might have, because it's going to inform their restoration work. It can tell them so much about the character of a woodland, how it's arrived at how it is today, and so on. So I do a lot of work with people like the Borders Forest Trust and Trees for Life and the Woodland Trust for Scotland, all of whom are interested in the history of wooded landscapes because it informs their conservation work.
Yeah, amazing. Now, I want to discuss some of your notable projects, some of your favourites.
Oh,
you must have so many. You must have just so many. Yeah. But is there even one or two would be nice?
One or two. Well, it's so hard to choose. It's like choosing your favourite child. I mean, it's so hard to do that. You probably shouldn't do it. But I've mentioned St Giles already. That was fantastic. I didn't even know that that 5-story bell frame existed until somebody in the know told me. And when I went and had a look at it, I was blown away. There it was, hiding in plain sight, really, in the centre of Edinburgh's Old Town, this remarkable timber frame structure. So St Giles is right up there as one of my favourites. I'll give you a couple of other favourites. Well, okay, here's a good one. Needpath Castle. Needpath Castle is near Peebles in the Scottish Borders. It's special to me because I got married in it. Okay.
Oh, lovely.
But I didn't tell my husband to be this, but the reason I was so keen to get married in it is because it's got lovely old timbers in it. And eventually, sometime later, after getting married there in 2003, I had this research project funded by Historic Environment Scotland to look at oak in southeast Scotland, and Peebles is in southeast Scotland. So I took the opportunity to sample the timbers in Needpath Castle, and they tell a very interesting story. They're like a microcosm of the bigger picture. This is a castle that is about 4 stories high. In the basement level, in the vaults of the castle, there is a floor made of oak, okay, and these massive joists of oak. The roof structure of Needpath Castle is also all oak. We sampled, me and my fantastic colleague Hamish Darragh, who you'll know from our ICOMOS group, took core samples out of these timbers in the vaults of the basement and in the roof at Needpath. Turned out that the ones in the basement are really early, original native timbers dating to the early 15th century.
Huh.
And they would not have travelled far. Needpath Castle's in the locality of the Ettrick Forest, as would have existed back in the day. The roof is a re-roofing of the castle in the 16th century, in the 1500s. And that entire roof is built with Norwegian oak.
Is it really?
We are talking about a site that is 100 kilometres inland up the River Tweed. So we're about as far from the sea as you can imagine in Scotland, yet they brought Norwegian oak to it to build the roof. And that is in one example, you're seeing what happened to woodland in Scotland in the late medieval period. We went from having decent woodland up until around 1400, 1420 to having no decent timber by the time they had to re-roof Needpath. So it's one site that encapsulates an awful lot of
amazing
story of what's happened here.
Yeah. And do you know, is there any evidence of how they transported the oak? Was it in log form? Was it converted before it got to Scotland?
That's a very good question. I don't think we know for sure, but probably a lot of it was hewn square before it was transported.
Yeah, you think that would be because it'd be more economical, wouldn't it? They'd be able to stack.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a lot of evidence from the woodworking evidence that it's a hand hewn, you know. Hamish is very good at that. He looks at the tool mark signatures and the surface patterns of the wood to work out how they've been converted and so on. So probably a lot were hewn square before they were transported, but they were further cut down here, I think, you know, because they're quite economical use of timber. We get a lot of quarter bulks, if you know what I mean, where it's not the whole stem at all. And that roof, for example, at Needpath, the size of the timbers is quite small, but they've been cut down from much bigger, been reduced down to sort of quarter bulks. We see that a lot here.
And is that building being used? Is that open to the public? What's the environment like in that particular building? Is there heating now, or what's it like?
Needpath's very special to me because I got married there. Right, it's in private ownership. It's not a Hess property. Right. I think now it was open at certain hours to the public in the past, but I believe now it's mainly used as a letting property. But it's still a very true to itself. It's not been, you know, massively restored or anything. The roof is on it. It's got nice open fireplaces that you can have a fire in, and people can stay in the castle for as long as they like, as long as they can foot the bill. So it's turned into a nice holiday home type destination. It's probably still used for events like marriages as well.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. So now looking ahead, what are, we've spoken about obviously some of these, but the biggest challenges and opportunities sort of facing dendrochronology in the coming decades? How many young Coralies are there?
Yeah, this is again something Anne and I have been campaigning for, is to get support for training the next generation. Those discussions are ongoing, but we've been having those discussions for 5 years easily, and nothing really concrete has emerged in terms of funding. Because what we need is funding for the trainer as well as the trainee. I'm a freelancer. Anne works through a commercial company. We are, to train a dendrochronologist, you're not talking about a couple of afternoons, you're talking about a couple of years. I'm sure your field is the same, that it takes a lot of specialist training to do what your team does.
Yes.
It doesn't that's not acquired overnight. So we need support somehow for time for both ourselves and our trainees. We do have young people working with us, but we don't have the support for really putting in the time with them for training.
That's the thing. A lot of people don't realise it's incredibly expensive to have somebody on board because the time it takes. And yeah, it's one of those frustrating things. I've been approached in the past, and somebody's phoned up. Well, could you possibly take my son on? Well, I could if I had the support. If I have some funding, and somebody wants to pay me X amount a year, then absolutely, I'd love to do that. But me as a very small business, it's just very, very difficult.
Yes, it really is. So I'm going to. Can I big up another one of my clients now? Because
yeah, please do.
Okay, in Dunbar, which is in East Lothian on the east coast of Scotland, there's a fantastic social enterprise called The Ridge. And what The Ridge are doing is training people in traditional building skills. They're training people who've had difficulties, like they might have been in prison, or they might have had addiction issues, or they might have been unemployed for a very long time. The Ridge are training people like them in traditional building skills and are using those skills to restore historic buildings on the high street in Dunbar. And we are just embarking on a project with The Ridge to do a whole building dendrochronology project. This will be the first time that's ever been done, looking at all the timber in the building. And from what we've already seen of it, there are not just hundreds, but thousands of pieces of wood in one building. And if that building was not being worked on by such an enlightened client, most of that would end up in a skip.
Wow. This
is I want to stop moaning now and say what we need. We need The Ridge multiplied X times across the whole of the country.
Right, there's a working example there.
Yes, absolutely.
Just need to replicate it.
And we're going to be doing not just the hands-on work, but we'll be running workshops and inviting professionals to come and see what we're doing and learn from that example. So, but hopefully by example, that can be a bit of a leadership project where we can influence people and shift hearts and minds on how we might roll out dendrochronology across more historic buildings in Scotland.
I can see a Scottish tour coming, Coralie.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. That would be fantastic. Yeah, I'm well up for that.
Yeah.
We could see there are so many interesting examples we could look at here, but I think The Ridge would make a particularly good place to start. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, full of hope.
And no, that's good. That's exactly what we need as well, because there is just I was talking to Marianne Sir yesterday on the podcast, and we were talking after we recorded, and there's just such there's sort of a crisis in this area, not only because there's a lack of funding, but it's also youngsters are a bit different from when you and I were training. There is a different difference of mentality. You can't, they've grown up in a very, very different world with lots of nice shiny things to look at. So sometimes, dendro might not cut the mustard, or wood conservation might not cut the mustard, but YouTube and being a pop singer is a little bit more interesting. But I just think there is so much out there for youngsters to get distracted by. When you and I were growing up, there weren't huge opportunities where you just had to focus on that or that, and if you didn't do it, you're not going to succeed. So it's different. It's just a different place, but not saying that there are still individuals out there. I know I've just taken on a 22-year-old who's absolutely fantastic, and I need another 15.
Yeah,
like that.
That's when we think again about education. There are kids who would be best doing practical things, hands-on things. There are people that are best suited to doing hands-on things, but do they get the opportunity to do them when they're at school? I don't know whether there's enough of an opportunity to do practical stuff when it's so much easier to do everything digitally,
Yes, exactly that. So just as we are having some closing remarks, what would you say, and again, there's many, but I think I know what you're going to say, the most rewarding aspect of your work would be?
Well, the most rewarding aspect of my work is when I can give the information to a client who really appreciates it. I can tell them a date to a year, perhaps to a season of when their timber was felled, and I can tell them where it came from. And people's minds are blown by that.
Yeah, I bet they are. I bet they are.
It is truly magical every time when it happens. Just needs more of it to happen.
Yeah, no. And anybody interested in learning about dendrochronology, what would you recommend? Are there, different organizations? I mean, your book, we're going to put a link to that in the show notes. But what would you recommend for somebody who's really keen to get into this subject?
Well, it's very difficult to get into it, given that we don't have any funding for training. But I'd say again, I'll plug this again, that this is a really good place to start. This is written for a general audience. It would give people a good insight into the different fields of dendrochronology. And, I think that'd be good. Say someone was at university and had the opportunity to choose a dissertation. If they were at a university where they've got any dendro people, it would give them a good chance to think of a great project they could do with a bit of guidance. But there are only a handful of universities that have dendrochronologists in them. St Andrews is one of them. They're dendroclimatologists mainly, but they're beginning to think about doing heritage work as well there. For example, Lampeter has a dendrochronologist. I think it's Lampeter. Nigel Nailing is in Wales anyway, at one of the universities. Neil Loader is in Swansea University doing isotope dating. Now, he's not a heritage person, but a lot of heritage people are going to Neil with material that is not readily datable on ring width, but oxygen isotopes make some of that material more datable. That's the work that Neil Loader and his team are doing at Swansea University. So there's some really exciting developments, and the isotope work is a chapter. There's a chapter about it in this research framework.
Wonderful.
So there's some new techniques coming along which will make some of the trickier material more datable.
And I think anybody out there that's interested, just go for it. Yes, there's a lack of funding, but it's an incredible subject and industry to get into. And if you want something that much, just keep on knocking on people's doors. And this is the good thing about the digital world we live in. It's far easier to get connected now, isn't it? Way easier. That's a huge positive. You can just keep on just contacting people, and just do it, because it's incredibly rewarding work, and very much needed as well.
So lucky, honestly. I'm sure you feel the same way, Vincent. I'm so lucky that I accidentally stumbled into doing what I'm doing. Yeah. Because I am never bored, and that is the best luxury you can have. Yeah.
And you're always learning. That's what I love about it. It's just,
yes.
I do get imposter syndrome sometimes, a lot of the time, because I just realize that I just need to know more. But that's the lovely thing, isn't it? You're constantly learning.
Every site brings you some new surprise or new dimension to what you're doing. And just absolutely lucky to be one of the few people that stumbled into doing this magical process.
No, it's wonderful. It's been an absolute pleasure, Coralie. I've really enjoyed it, and it's made me think about what we said about the what's happening in Scotland, or what isn't happening in Scotland, more to the point. And I definitely got a tour planned. I've got to come up. I've just never been on a professional capacity, so we're going to have to arrange that. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. It's fascinating hearing about your work and the vital role it plays in conserving our natural and cultural heritage. But before we wrap up, where can listeners learn more about you? We're going to include your website, but can they contact you on LinkedIn, or do you Instagram, or any of those socials?
Oh, I do socials. I do. I'm there. So you can find me at Dendrochronicle. We can put links in the blurb afterwards, but I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Blue Sky, where all the cool kids hang out.
Oh, very trendy.
Yes, very trendy. And my website has a contact form on it. So if anybody has a question they would like answered, I'm very happy to be contacted via the website, the Dendrochronicle website's contact form.
Coralie, thank you so much. I will say goodbye for now.
Thank you, and thanks very much for asking me. It's been a pleasure to speak to you today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.